10:14 a.m. at Gate G12, Newark Airport. A 7'1" giant in a cheap $19 hoodie hunches over to avoid hitting the ceiling. Shaq just wants to make his flight to Louisiana to visit his old teacher's grave. But Security Chief Silas looks at his plainclothes and sees a threat. A harsh interrogation starts because he looks suspicious. His trip down memory lane suddenly turns into a battle against a broken airline system. This legend has a doctoral degree, but they treat him like a criminal. Is his silence just patience, or is a storm about to hit? The alarm on his phone buzzed at 4:15 in the morning. Shaq rolled over and slapped the screen to make it stop. His body took up almost the whole bed. His feet hung off the edge by a good 6 inches. He sat up slow. His left knee cracked like an old door hinge. That knee had been barking at him since the 2002 season. Some mornings it whispered. Other mornings it screamed. Today it screamed. He sat on the edge of the bed for a minute. He pressed his thumb into the side of his knee. The pain was old news. He knew how to sit with it. Outside his window, Orlando was still dark and quiet. He liked mornings like this. Nobody watching. Nobody asking for anything. The house around him was huge, but he never used most of it. Most nights he stayed in one small room near the kitchen. Big houses echoed too much when you lived in them alone. He preferred small spaces that reminded him of Newark. Small rooms felt safer somehow. Less to lose. Less to explain. Sometimes the biggest houses hold the quietest, loneliest mornings. He stretched his arms above his head, joints popping one by one. 20 years in the league had left marks on every part of him. His shoulders remembered every collision. His back remembered every fall. But this morning, none of that mattered as much as the date. Today was the day he finally kept a promise to himself. He walked to his closet. It was bigger than most people's bedrooms. But he didn't reach for anything fancy. He pulled out a gray hoodie he bought at Walmart for $19.99. The tag was still folded soft from being washed a dozen times. He tugged it over his head. The fabric stretched tight across his shoulders. It always looked like it belonged to a smaller man. He picked up a pair of worn jeans next. Then plain white sneakers, the kind nobody would look at twice. No chains, no watch, no logos screaming his name. Just a big man trying to disappear into a hoodie. On the dresser sat a small piece of paper. It was soft and worn at the folds, like it had been opened 100 times. Written on it in pencil was an address in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Underneath the address were 3 words, MS. Loretta Gable. She was his 3rd-grade teacher back in Newark. She used to keep a granola bar in her desk drawer just for him. She never asked why a growing boy was always hungry. She just handed it over like it was nothing. Back then, Shaq was already tall for his age, all elbows and knees. Other kids called him names because he stood out too much. Ms. Gable never let the teasing slide in her classroom. She'd tell the class, "Tall trees give the best shade." He never forgot that line. He carried it his whole life. Some afternoons she kept him, after school, just to talk. She asked about his day, not his height, or his grades. Nobody else seemed to notice him the way she did. When his shoes fell apart, that winter, new ones showed up at his desk. Nobody ever said where they came from. He always suspected her. Mrs. Gable passed away 2 months ago. Shaq found out from a former classmate's Facebook post. He read it 3 times before it fully landed. Then he booked a flight the same night. He folded the paper and slid it into his hoodie pocket. His hand lingered there a second longer than it needed to. Some things you carry in your pocket. Some things you carry heavier than that. He grabbed his beat-up backpack and walked out to his car. No driver. No entourage. Just him and the quiet hum of the highway. The sky was still black when he pulled into airport parking. Inside Newark Liberty International, the terminal buzzed with early travelers. Rolling suitcases clattered across the tile floor in every direction. Coffee smells drifted out from a small kiosk near the gate. A janitor pushed a cart of cleaning supplies past a row of chairs. None of it slowed down for the giant man walking through. Shaq folded himself into a plastic chair at gate G12. His knees jammed up near his chest. He had bought 2 seats on the plane, like he always did. One seat never held him comfortably. Never had. Never would. The chair beneath him creaked under his weight. He shifted twice before finding a position that didn't hurt his knee. A toddler nearby stared up at him with wide, curious eyes. The child's mother pulled him gently away, whispering an apology. Shaq just smiled small and looked back down at his phone. He checked his phone out of habit. A notification popped up from his charitable foundation. The account had processed another wave of donations. The running total read $412 million across all his given causes over the years. He glanced at it for half a second, then closed the app. In his other hand was a paper bag from a corner store. Inside sat a plain ham sandwich, the kind you get for $4.50. He took a bite and chewed slow, staring at nothing. A man worth hundreds of millions, eating a cheap sandwich in a plastic chair. Nobody in the terminal even glanced his way. That was exactly how he liked it. He rubbed his knee again. The old injury throbbed in the cold terminal air. For a second, he wanted to just disappear into the crowd completely. Not be looked at. Not be questioned. Not be anything but a tired man going home. Over the intercom, a flat voice announced a delay for Skylink Flight 702. Groans rippled through the gate area. A woman muttered under her breath. A man checked his watch and sighed hard. People shifted in their seats, annoyed and restless. A businessman nearby snapped at a gate agent, demanding answers she didn't have. She apologized quietly, keeping her voice steady despite his tone. Shaq watched the exchange, from his corner, unnoticed and unbothered. He had seen this kind of frustration 1,000 times before. Airports had a way of bringing out the worst in tired people. That's when Silas walked the gate area, boots clicking on tile. His uniform was pressed, so sharp it looked painted on. His eyes swept the crowd like a hawk hunting for the wrong movement. He stopped near gate G12 and locked onto Shaq. A giant man, hood pulled up, shoulders hunched forward. Head down, hands buried in his pocket like he was hiding something. Silas didn't see a tired traveler. He saw a problem. He saw a headline waiting to happen on his watch. He turned to his radio and murmured something low. 2 other guards drifted closer, trying to look casual. Silas kept his eyes locked on the hunched giant by the window. In his mind, he had already decided the story. He walked up slow, boots squeaking against the floor. "Sir, I need to see some identification," Silas said, voice flat and cold. Shaq looked up without a word. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his regular driver's license, not some special pass. Silas took it and studied the name. Shaquille. He read it twice, like it was a joke somebody wrote. His eyes flicked up at the giant man, then back down at the card. No way. Just some big guy with the same name. Had to be. Silas handed the license back, with 2 fingers, like it was dirty. "You've been sitting here a long time, not talking to anyone," he said. "That's suspicious behavior in my book." Shaq stayed quiet. He looked at the man, then looked away. Inside his head, a small voice whispered, "Tell him who you are." One sentence could end this whole thing right now. But another voice, older and steadier, told him to wait. Respond, don't react. That rule had never failed him yet. He wanted to see how far this would go. Not for pride. For proof. He needed to see the real Silas. So he said nothing and folded his hands in his lap. A few feet away, a young mother stood at the counter. 42, and she knew that number by heart. She had already used her last card to buy the boy a juice box. Lorna worked 3 jobs just to keep their small apartment. Diner shifts in the morning, cleaning offices at night, and weekends at a warehouse. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours and longer than she could remember. This trip to see her sister in Georgia was supposed to be a break. Instead, she stood frozen at the counter, praying the fee would just go away. Her son, only 6 years old, tugged at her sleeve again. "Mommy, are we still going?" he asked, voice small and unsure. "Of course we are, baby," she said, forcing a smile onto her tired face. Inside, panic clawed at her chest. $90 might as well be 1,000. She had nothing left to give. Silas turned from Shaq and marched toward her instead. "Your bag is 2 kilos over the limit," he snapped. "That's an extra $90 fee, ma'am. Airline policy." Lorna's hands started shaking as she dug through her purse. "Please," she whispered. "I don't have that right now." Her son tugged her sleeve, sensing something was wrong. Silas crossed his arms and stared her down without blinking. "Rules are rules," he said. "I don't make exceptions." Shaq watched, from his plastic chair, jaw tight, saying nothing. Lorna wasn't crying from anger. She was crying from exhaustion, the kind of tired that lives in your bones for years. She caught Shaq's eye for just a second. It wasn't fear on her face. It was recognition. Two people getting squeezed by a system that didn't care. Something inside Shaq shifted right then, quiet but permanent. He wasn't just flying to a grave anymore. He was going to clean this mess up first. An announcement finally called his flight for boarding. Shaq stood slow, joints popping, and shuffled toward the gate. He had bought 2 seats, side by side, just for his legs. He barely settled into his seat when a voice called his row number. Silas stood in the aisle, with 2 more guards behind him. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft," he said. Passengers around him went dead silent, phones already rising to record. Shaq didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He unfolded himself from the seat, joint by joint. His size 23 shoes thudded down the aisle, heavy and slow. Each step echoed like a drum through the quiet cabin. People stared, whispering, some already filming for their friends. A flight attendant pressed herself against a seat to let him pass. Her eyes followed him the whole way, confused and a little worried. A child near the front pointed and asked her mother a question. The mother shushed her quickly, pulling her back into her seat. Nobody said a word out loud, but everyone was watching closely. He kept his head down the whole walk. Not from shame, from choice. He wasn't giving them a show. The plane door closed behind him, with a hollow, final click. They marched him through a back hallway most travelers never see. Bare walls, flickering lights. The air smelled like old carpet and bleach. Old posters about safety rules hung crooked on the walls. A vending machine hummed loudly near the end of the hallway. Nobody walking that hallway ever felt like they mattered much. Silas shoved open a door marked Interview Room 3. The hinges creaked loud, echoing down the empty corridor. He motioned Shaq inside, with a sharp, impatient wave of his hand. The other 2 guards stayed posted outside, arms crossed, watching the door. "Sit," Silas ordered, pointing at a metal chair bolted to the floor. Shaq lowered himself into it, knees jammed against the table. Silas snatched his phone off the table without asking. "You won't need this," he said, sliding it into a drawer. The room had one small window near the ceiling, too high to see through. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. The metal table between them was cold and scratched from years of use. Shaq folded his hands and waited, calm as still water. Silas paced back and forth, boots squeaking against the floor tiles. Silas had worked this job for 11 years, climbing rank by rank. He believed rules kept order, and order kept him in control. Somewhere along the way, control had started to feel like power. He liked the way people flinched when he raised his voice. He never noticed how tired that made everyone around him. He flipped through a folder, scanning some background notes. "Says here you got a doctorate," Silas said, smirking. "Education, right?" Shaq nodded once, saying nothing else. "Bet you bought that thing," Silas muttered. "People like you always do." The words landed, but Shaq's face didn't move. He had heard worse. He had survived worse. He thought of his mother, Lucille, back in Newark years ago. She used to say, "Let your actions do the loud talking." Lucille raised him alone, through years that never came easy. She worked long shifts and still made sure he ate every night. She never once let him feel sorry for himself, not even quietly. When people stared at his size, she told him to stand taller. "Big don't mean scary," she used to say. "Big means responsible." He carried that lesson everywhere, through every arena, every locker room. Responsibility meant staying calm even when the room wanted him to explode. It meant absorbing insults without letting them plant roots inside him. Silas's words bounced off him like rain off a windshield. They didn't stick. They never had a chance to. A young intern named Leo stood by the door, watching everything. Leo was only 22, still new to the job, still learning the ropes. He grew up watching basketball with his father every single Sunday. He knew every stat, every highlight, every championship run by heart. Leo's eyes went wide when he saw the driver's license on the table. He recognized the name. He recognized the face under the hood. His heart started pounding hard against his chest. He wanted to shout out, to stop this whole thing immediately. His mouth opened to say something. Silas cut him off hard. Don't even think about it, kid. You want to keep this job? You stay quiet. Leo's jaw clenched, but he stepped back into silence. Inside, guilt started eating at him like acid. Silas leaned across the table, getting in Shaq's face. I could put you on the no-fly list right now, he said. Permanent ban. Maybe even an arrest for disorderly conduct. Shaq's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward, slow and steady, mocking him. Every tick meant 1 second closer to a locked cemetery gate. He thought of Ms. Gable's grave, quiet under some faraway tree. He thought of her voice telling him to stay patient, always patient. Silas kept talking, listing threats like a grocery list. Fines, bans, reports filed with 3 different agencies. None of it seemed to bother the big man across the table. That silence unsettled Silas more than any argument could have. He wasn't used to people who didn't beg or shout back. He circled the table once, boots clicking against the tile. He wanted a reaction, any reaction, just to prove his power meant something. Shaq gave him nothing, just steady breathing and a calm, even gaze. It was the kind of quiet that made small men feel smaller. Silas didn't understand it yet, but he would soon enough. For hours left, before the cemetery gates closed for the night. For hours before his one chance to say goodbye slipped away. He kept his voice calm and even. I get 1 phone call, he said. That's my right. Silas laughed, short and mean. This ain't prison, big guy. But fine. 1 call. He slid the phone back across the table, smug and slow. Shaq dialed a number he barely ever had to use. His chief financial officer picked up on the second ring. Marcus, Shaq said quietly. Activate the emergency security clause. Skylink Logistics. There was a pause on the line, then a simple, understood, sir. Shaq hung up and set the phone down, without another word. Silas frowned, confused by the calm on Shaq's face. He expected panic. He expected pleading. He got neither. Outside the little room, something was already starting to shift. Screens across the terminal flickered, then changed all at once. Bright red letters filled every monitor in the building. All Skylink fleet grounded until further notice. Gasps rippled through the terminal like a wave. Gate agents froze, staring at their monitors in confusion. Phones started buzzing everywhere, as staff group chats exploded. Nobody understood what was happening, only that it was bad. Somewhere in a glass office, a regional manager went pale. He grabbed his own phone and dialed corporate headquarters immediately. What is going on with our fleet? He shouted into the phone. His hands trembled as he waited for someone to answer. Around him, other managers rushed between desks, phones pressed to their ears. Nobody had ever seen a shutdown happen this fast, this total. The voice on the other end explained slowly, carefully, gravely. A silent investor held 40% of Skylink Logistics through a private fund. That clause had been buried deep inside a contract nobody ever expected to use. It existed for emergencies. True emergencies. Not scheduling problems or weather delays. Someone, somewhere, had just decided this counted as one. That investor had just triggered a full operational shutdown clause. The investor's name made the regional manager's stomach drop completely. Shaquille O'Neal. Word moved down the chain of command like wildfire. Text messages flew between managers, each one more frantic than the last. Someone pulled up an old photo of Shaq and compared it to security footage. The match was undeniable, plain as day, right there on the screen. Someone finally reached Silas on his radio, voice shaking. The man in interview room 3, the voice said. Do you know who that is? Silas swallowed hard. Some big guy? Says his name is Shaquille. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, uncertainty creeping in. That's not a coincidence, you idiot. The voice snapped back. That's the owner. That's the man who just grounded our entire airline. Silas's face drained of all its color in an instant. His hands started to shake as the folder slipped from his fingers. He turned slowly to look at Shaq, who hadn't moved an inch. Shaq reached across the table and picked up his own phone. He opened a photo of an older woman with kind, tired eyes. This is Ms. Gable, Shaq said quietly. My third-grade teacher. She fed me when I had nothing at home some days. She died 2 months ago, and I'm trying to say goodbye. You delayed a kid trying to get home to say thank you. Silas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His legs felt weak underneath him. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He simply broke. He sank down into the empty chair across the table. His hands covered his face, and his shoulders shook quietly. Years of pride crumbled in a single, silent moment. He thought about every traveler he had ever talked down to. He thought about every time he mistook exhaustion for danger. No shouting, no excuses, just silence and shame filling the small room. Shaq watched him for a long moment, without any anger left in him. He stood up slowly, joints cracking, and walked toward the door. The hallway outside was dead silent as he stepped through it. Every gate agent, every guard, every worker had heard the news by now. Nobody said a word as the giant man walked past them. Some lowered their eyes. Others simply stared in stunned respect. He didn't head back toward his gate. Instead, he walked straight to the main terminal counter. There, still standing with her son, was Lorna Briggs. Her flight had been canceled along with the rest of the fleet. She looked exhausted, defeated, holding her boy close to her side. Shaq walked up and stood in front of the counter. "Put her on any flight, any airline, whatever gets her home," he said. The agent blinked, confused, then started typing immediately. He turned to the wider room, full of stranded travelers. "Everybody stuck because of this mess gets rebooked," he said. "On me. Except Skylink. They can sit with what they did today." A murmur rolled through the crowd, disbelief turning slowly into gratitude. Lorna's eyes welled up as the agent handed her a new boarding pass. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. "Thank you so much." Shaq just nodded once. He didn't need thanks. He needed this fixed. He turned back toward Silas, who now stood by the counter, ashamed. "You're going to carry bags," Shaq told him, "for the next 10 hours. Every tired worker in this terminal, every heavy suitcase. You carry it." Silas nodded without a single word of protest. For the rest of that long day, something strange happened at Gate G12. The man who once puffed his chest up with pride now hauled luggage. He carried duffel bags for exhausted nurses coming off overnight shifts. He carried suitcases for elderly travelers moving slow through the terminal. One older woman thanked him twice, patting his arm gently. He mumbled a quiet reply and moved on to the next bag. A teenager traveling alone handed him a backpack without even looking up. Silas took it without complaint, sweat dripping down his forehead. This was nothing like the job he thought he signed up for. Sweat soaked through his crisp uniform by the afternoon. His hands, once used to point and accuse, now blistered and ached. He didn't complain once. He understood exactly what he was learning. Leo, the young intern, watched it all unfold from a distance. He finally understood what silence really meant in Shaq's world. Not weakness, not fear, just patience waiting for the truth to surface. That night, Leo called his father the moment he got home. He told him the whole story, start to finish, voice shaking with excitement. His father laughed and said, "See, that's why you always stay respectful." Leo promised himself he'd remember this day for the rest of his life. Some lessons don't come from textbooks. They come from watching a quiet giant wait. He decided right then to treat every stranger like they might matter more than they show. Passengers in the terminal started clapping as word spread through the crowd. Some pulled out their phones to record the tired security chief working. A few came up quietly to thank him, unsure what else to say. Silas barely looked up. He just kept moving one bag at a time. An older man, missing his connecting flight, stopped near the counter. He watched the giant they called Shaq walk away toward the exit. "That's a good man," the older traveler said to no one in particular. Nobody argued with him. Nobody needed to. By early evening, the interrogation room sat empty and forgotten. The red letters had faded from the terminal screens. Skylink's leadership scrambled behind closed doors, drafting new policies overnight. A company memo went out announcing a new customer respect program. It carried a simple name, Dignity First. Funded quietly using penalty money from the very shutdown that exposed them. No press conference. No credit taken. Just a policy shift nobody could undo now. As night settled over Newark, Shaq walked out to long-term parking. He wasn't flying anymore. Flights felt too slow for what he needed. Instead, He found an old rental pickup truck, dusty and plain. He climbed in, knees jammed against the wheel, and started the engine. The old paper with Ms. Gable's address sat on the passenger seat. He pulled out of the airport and pointed the truck south. The engine rattled a little as it warmed up in the cold air. He rolled the window down just a crack, letting the night air in. It smelled like jet fuel and rain, familiar in its own strange way. He glanced once at the terminal in his rearview mirror, then looked forward. There was nothing left behind him that needed his attention anymore. Hours rolled by under empty highway lights. Gas station coffee kept him awake somewhere around Virginia. He didn't stop for long. He didn't want to lose the night. The truck's old radio crackled between stations most of the drive. Billboards blurred past, advertising diners and cheap motel rooms. His knee throbbed every time he shifted his foot on the pedal. He didn't complain. Complaining never got anyone anywhere faster. Somewhere around North Carolina, he pulled into a gas station for fuel. A tired clerk behind the counter barely looked up from her phone. He paid in cash and grabbed a bottle of water for the road. Nobody recognized him in the dim light of the parking lot. That suited him just fine. He climbed back into the truck and kept driving. Somewhere past midnight, the radio played old gospel songs, low and steady. He thought about his mother's voice, calm and sure, guiding him still. He thought about a granola bar handed over without a single question asked. The sun began rising just as he crossed into Louisiana. Fields stretched out gold and green on either side of the road. His knee ached from the long drive, but he didn't slow down. By mid-morning, he reached a small cemetery outside Baton Rouge. Old oak trees stood guard over rows of quiet headstones. He parked the truck and stepped out slowly into the warm air. The gravel crunched under his sneakers as he walked toward the gate. A rusty iron fence circled the whole property, worn soft by weather. Spanish moss hung low from the branches, swaying gently in the breeze. It felt peaceful here, far removed from flashing cameras and crowded gates. For the first time in 2 days, he finally felt like himself. He walked between the graves, boots crunching softly on dry grass. Finally, he found her stone, simple and clean, her name carved deep. Loretta Gable, beloved teacher, beloved friend. He knelt down, joints screaming in protest, but he didn't care. Around him, birds called softly from the tall oak branches above. The grass was still damp from the early morning dew. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed low and steady. From his backpack, he pulled out something wrapped carefully in cloth. It was his framed doctoral degree, the one Silas had mocked. He had carried it the whole way, wrapped tight against the bouncing truck. Not for show, not for anyone else to see. Just for her. He set it gently against the base of the headstone. For a long moment, he just knelt there in total silence. Then he spoke, voice low and rough with emotion. "I did it, Miss Gable," he said quietly. "Just like you said I would. You never asked why I was hungry. You just fed me anyway. That stuck with me my whole life. More than you probably knew." He reached out and brushed dust off the top of the stone. The wind moved gently through the oak trees above him. For the first time in days, his shoulders finally relaxed completely. He stayed there a long while, just sitting with the quiet. No cameras, no crowds, no one demanding to know who he was. Just a man and the memory of someone who once fed him kindness. He thought about all the years between that classroom and this graveyard. Championships, cameras, arenas full of screaming fans. None of it felt like this. This quiet moment under an oak tree meant more than any trophy ever had. He finally understood what she had given him back then. Not just food, not just shoes. She gave him proof that he mattered. Eventually he stood, knees cracking loud in the still morning air. He brushed the dirt from his jeans and looked around one last time. The cemetery was peaceful, rows of stones catching the soft morning light. He whispered a quiet goodbye and turned to walk back to the truck. Birds scattered from a nearby branch as he walked past. The gravel path felt shorter going back than it had coming in. He climbed into the truck and sat there a moment, just breathing. Then he started the engine and pulled slowly back onto the road. Behind him, the cemetery grew smaller and smaller in the mirror. Back in Newark, the sun rose over a very different scene. Silas stood near baggage claim, arms aching, back bent from exhaustion. He lifted another heavy suitcase for a tired miner heading home. The worker nodded a small thanks, not knowing the story behind the moment. Silas nodded back, quiet and humble, nothing left of his old arrogance. He thought about the giant man in the plain hoodie. A question kept circling through his mind as he worked. If that man hadn't been Shaquille O'Neal, would anyone have noticed? Would he have ever felt sorry for how he treated a stranger? He didn't have an answer yet. Maybe he never fully would. But for the first time in years, he kept lifting anyway. One bag at a time. One tired traveler at a time. Somewhere south, under warm Louisiana sunlight, a giant man rose from the grass. He dusted off his knees and looked one last time at the stone. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove toward home. He didn't need anyone to know what happened at that cemetery. He didn't need anyone to know what happened at that airport either. Some debts get paid quietly. Some promises get kept without an audience. Some lessons only sink in once pride gets stripped completely away. The old pickup truck rumbled back onto the highway, heading north. Behind him, a small cemetery in Baton Rouge sat peaceful once again. Ahead of him, an entire airline had learned a lesson it wouldn't forget. And somewhere in between, a mother named Lorna tucked her son into bed that night. She told him a story about a giant stranger who fixed everything. Her son asked if giants were real. She smiled and said, "Sometimes they are." She sat by his bed a little longer than usual that night. For the first time in months, her shoulders felt light instead of heavy. Tomorrow she'd still have 3 jobs and a small apartment to worry about. But tonight, someone had reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. Her son drifted off to sleep with a small smile on his face. Lorna turned off the lamp and sat in the dark a moment. She thought about the quiet giant who never raised his voice once. He didn't need to. His actions had already said everything that mattered. Miles away, in a small house near the airport, Silas soaked his aching feet. His wife asked him how his day went, and he paused a long time. "I learned something today," he finally said. "Something I should have known already." He didn't explain further. Some lessons take time to put into words. But something in him had shifted, quiet and permanent, just like it had for Shaq. The next morning, Gate G12 buzzed with ordinary travelers once again. Nobody there knew what had happened just one day before. Life at the airport moved on, the way it always does. But somewhere in a quiet Louisiana cemetery, a promise had finally been kept. And somewhere in Newark, a system had learned to treat people with respect. A single quiet morning had changed more than anyone at Gate G12 realized.